The Cold War, a rivalry that happens, often said, from 1945 on, in my humble opinion, and that of other, perhaps more learned people than I. This is happening really at right after the turn of the century, when there is a Bolshevik revolution in 1917, and we being the West, attempt to create a cordon sanitaire and isolate those Bolsheviks from the rest of Europe. Of course, they're not going to appreciate this, but certainly the Cold War per se, the Cold War that you're familiar with and you study in more detail, has many, many layers. One layer, military coalitions. There's an ideological perspective that's very important, because essentially we're talking about a collectivist society versus an individualistic society. The Cold War has an element of psychology and espionage, of trying to outdo each other technologically, industrially. Okay. The space race is a major portion of this. The space race is very nice to see John Glenn go round and round the Earth, but there is the military aspect. And we're saying that we can control outer space, we can control a spacecraft and blow the other guy up. Okay? And finally, there is that element of, especially after the development of the atom bombs, that we don't want to go nose to nose with the Soviets or the PRC, but we're going to fight through proxies. Okay. Briefly, we're going to touch on the following: the Civil War in China. Okay. In my humble opinion, the first time in Europe that the Cold War turns hot, which is the Greek Civil War. The French in Indochina. We're going to limit our perspective to France and not the United States, otherwise it tends to prolong this discussion. The Korean War, Egypt, Suez, and Nasser. The Dominican Republic, Juan Bosch, and his leftist government, which we helped to undermine and overthrow. Che, Bolivia. The Syrians acting as Soviet proxies throughout the Middle East and even in Europe from 1970 to 1986. The struggle in Rhodesia, likewise in Lebanon. And dovetailing into that are the Cubans, being the Franklin Du Bois of the Soviet Union in Angola and throughout Africa. Our little mini adventure in Grenada. And then, for many of you, Flight 007, that we don't know very much about, I would suspect. And topping it off with the spy war. Let's see, can I just do this? Yes, I can just do that. Okay, Chinese Civil War. As you know, Chiang Kai-shek, that is, and Mao are the students of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, and they are both vying for power. Each sees themselves as donning the mantle of Dr. Sun Yat-sen and being his heir apparent. This is not to be. There's a temporary truce in 46, okay, where we send a very capable man by the name of George C. Marshall. Should ring a little Freudian slip. Should ring a bell, because we're talking, no one knows. Marshall Plan, very good. Okothostos for all of you that didn't know. Okay, Marshall Plan. George C. Marshall attempts to mediate a truce. This is not successful, and the war will continue with the United States. Nope, I can just do this. With the United States backing largely Chiang and the communists backing Mao Zedong. Okay, this is where we see the seedlings planted of this idea of hearts and minds. This phrase really comes into its own during the Vietnam War, this hearts and minds business. But again, the little seedlings are during the Chinese Civil War, because you have more and more Chiang being able to control the large population centers along the coast, but the interior is being controlled by Mao. And eventually, if you are in such a situation, you are essentially on the defensive, and Chiang will lose one by one the major cities to the point where because he is losing the allegiance of the Chinese people, because he is seen by more and more people as inefficient, at the very least, if not corrupt, and they turn him out. Okay. So if you fast forward during the Chinese Civil War, by the way, the IBO doesn't, the IBO is not big, the International Baccalaureate Organization, it's not big on battles. So if you were to memorize every battle in the Civil War and every battle in the Chinese Civil War and every other war, that would make you a great candidate for a history professorship, but not for passing the IB exam. If you know generally what's happening, you know, militarily, you are going to be fine. And if you know, let's say, you want to really back up you know, your knowledge, and you know a few major battles, okay? The American Civil War, of course, you know Antietam, and you know Gettysburg, and with that, you're basically fine. So, so forth and so on for all the other battles and all the other wars. So, suffice to say that by 1948, Chiang is in dire straits. His army is largely demoralized. His army is clinging on to major cities as the communists are pushing from the north to the south. Okay, and things are going very well for the PLA. The PLA is not, at this point, the PLA is not talking about collectivization and such. At least not, let's say, with capital letters and underline. You know, maybe on a low scale. They're talking more about agrarian reform, a phrase that you're going to hear throughout many of these revolutions. You hear it certainly in Cuba. When Fidel comes into power, he talks about agrarian reform. He doesn't talk about collectivization. Okay, and Chiang is at a disadvantage because he has fought a war, a long war against the Japanese, militarily. To use a boxing term, he's on the ropes. Okay, and he's just hanging on. He's just hanging on. And now he's exhausted militarily and economically. And things just don't seem to go well. So much so that by January 1949, okay, Happy New Year, for the commies anyway, Beijing falls. Kuomintang hightails it into Taiwan. See you next, otherwise known as Formosa. Fair warning for those of you that haven't had me, I go out of order in my slides all the time. I go ahead and behind and I add stuff. And mira que nice, you will get a copy of this. Okay, but what you don't get a copy of is what I add to the lecture. So yes, do pay attention, do take notes, because I add stuff to the lecture. But the written stuff that you see here, I will zap over to you electronically. Okay, no trees will be killed, only electrons will be arranged, like they say. Okay. So 1949, Chiang hightails it and goes to Formosa, and he is separated by nothing more than the Formosa Straits from the Taiwan Straits, and now communist China. Okay, this will be, by the way, this will be a sore point in international relations for the next several decades. One of the things that will indicate whether you're our friend or not internationally for the next several decades is whose government you recognize. And this is a very important point. It almost always comes up in the IB exam. Okay? Directly or indirectly. Whose government do you recognize? Do you recognize the government in Beijing as the legitimate government of China, or do you recognize Chiang Kai-shek in Formosa? Which is a funny situation because Chiang is not in control of 99% of what is China, but he is the legitimate government residing, or so the nationalist propaganda would say, residing temporarily in Taiwan. Okay? That temporary turned out to be quite a long time. Okay, Greek Civil War. The Greeks, like so many governments, have a problem, and so many governments throughout Europe during the war years, and that is the German war machine basically rolls all over Europe. So you have a Greek government in exile, and that government in exile really has, well, it has perhaps moral authority, but it has no practical authority. They're not in Greece, but you have guerrilla groups, back then called partisans. partisans. And some partisans are better organized than others. Some are on the right, some are on the left. Often, the ones on the left are better organized. Same thing, for example, in Yugoslavia, where you have a very efficient partisan by the name of, no one knows, very good, somebody's going to get an A on that exam, Josip Broz Tito. Well, same thing happens, the parallel is now Greece. Same thing happens in Greece, okay? And you will have the US and the UK, in the beginning, primarily the UK, backing, of course, those partisan groups which are center and right. And you have the next door neighbors of Greece, which are lefts, way to the left, Yugoslavia and Romania and Bulgaria and so on, but primarily Yugoslavia supporting the left. And there is the super synopsis of the Greek Civil War. So much for Tito saying later on that he is, what? Neutral, remember?
Not aligned.
Okay, and that's what I was touching on in the earlier slide. From 42 to 44, World War II is going on, the Germans are there, and these partisan groups have a common enemy. Hey, similar to what we were looking at earlier, China, right? Okay, when Chiang and Mao have a common enemy, they can direct their attention to that common enemy. Okay, now the Germans are gone, the Nazi Germans are gone, and now they, instead of turning on the Germans, they turn on each other. Okay. Okay. Greek government in exile is unable to largely influence this. I mean, they can send messages and what have you, but they're not there. Okay. So you have the National Liberation Front. Okay. Keywords typically for all these leftist groups: liberation. And later on, as a matter of fact, you will see Nikita Khrushchev using in the early 60s this term, wars of national liberation. But he coins the term, but the term is used earlier. The National Liberation Front, the EAM, because remember this is Greek, that is basically controlled by the communists. Okay? And beginning in 43, again, the war is not quite over yet, okay? Although Germany is, you know, the handwriting's on the wall for the Germans. Okay? By 43, 44, they're not only fighting the Germans, but they're also fighting each other. Okay? And the EAM tries to control the capital, which is Athens. We are not going to let this happen. Well, we being, at this point, primarily Brits, but the Brits are exhausted militarily, and the Brits are exhausted economically. And there are some people in Britain that are very progressive in their outlook, and they realize that the days of them being true to the empire that you associate with Great Britain are over. One of those, by the way, in India was called Lord Mountbatten. Lord Mountbatten. Okay, so anyway, the Brits are going to back out of this little by little, and we will become the senior partner in this endeavor to contain communism. Okay? The Civil War per se erupts in 46. Okay. When the KKE decides to go on the round page and boycott the elections, start setting up guerrilla ambushes against the Greek army, and just disrupt things a la guerrilla style. Okay, the same things that they were doing with the Germans, they're going to start doing now with the Greek government. Okay? Okay. This will go on until 49, when finally the Greek Communist Broadcasting Station, the primary Greek Communist Broadcasting Station will say, you know, we are going to reach a peace agreement. There are lots of people, however, that are dissatisfied on the left with this, and they will go into neighboring Albania. Remember, again, north of Greece, you have all these communist states. They were turned communist by force of arms when the Soviet Union rolled over Eastern Europe, right? Okay. The good news and the bad news for the Greek Civil War. And for those of you thinking out of the box, there are a lot of parallels here with the Spanish Civil War. Greece is destroyed economically. Greece is also weakened. but there is a tremendous anti-communist sentiment amongst the victorious people, the ones that don't flee into Albania and other places. And Greece will be, for decades to come, a firm member of NATO and will be the anchor of NATO in southeastern Europe, in that area. Okay? Okay, and there you've got some data just for little Greece. 50,000 combatants died, more than 500,000 Greeks displaced, so on. Nasty stuff, nasty stuff. Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh and Indochine Francais. This is a story with many parallels throughout the developing world, where you have a former colonial power beaten by the Germans in Europe, beaten by the Japanese in Asia, and yet they still have this desire after the war to come back and have things as they were before. And the native people are just not happy with this idea of, Lucy, I'm home. Well, you're not home after all. You go back out the door, Ricky, so to speak. Okay? Ho Chi Minh trained in Europe, goes to the university in Paris, where he becomes a Marxist. Okay? That's where he gets his leftist indoctrination. And he will declare during the war, when the Vichy French are basically interned by the Japanese. Let me backpedal a little bit, so you understand the super weak and, to some degree, relatively ridiculous situation that the French are in. The French are defeated in World War II. 2/3 of France is taken over by Germany. Okay, 1/3 roughly is neutral, because they sign a peace agreement in Europe, so that the remaining third will not be conquered. The capital is no longer in Paris. That's under German control. The capital now is in Vichy. Okay. So, in that extraordinarily weak situation, we have the Japanese saying that in order to, and they ask in the nicest way, while twisting the French arms, metaphorically in the Far East. They say that to ensure the safe passage of their ships through sea lanes and so on, and geopolitically we need to be in Southeast Asia as well. So they will move into Southeast Asia without firing a shot. They will in turn, they will put in sort of a house arrest, if you will, okay, of French forces, and it is a very embarrassing situation for the French government to be in, but they can't do anything about it because of the situation that I just explained. Okay, remember that the Japanese go throughout Asia, promising essentially a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Okay, in other words, Asia for the Asians. Let's get rid of these Europeans, and now we can have Asia for the Asians. Certainly something that has, to Asian ears, sounds very, very good. Okay? And Ho Chi Minh and other people are very impressed by the fact that Asians were able to beat Europeans at their own game, drive them out, generally out of Asia, and he proclaims the independent Republic of Vietnam. Okay? Something that, of course, the French will not like when they decide to come back. Okay? Eventually, France will agree to recognize Vietnam as a free state within a French Union, a sort of Commonwealth arrangement similar to what the Brits have. But that is slow in being developed, and often the French are half-hearted at doing this. So much so that by 1949, now remember, the war ends in 45, okay? By 1949, they put a provisional government. Vietnam is not divided, in all of Vietnam, and this provisional government is headed by Bao Dai, Emperor Bao Dai. Okay? Recognized by France, by the United States, and just about all the Western countries. And certainly Bao Dai has his strings being pulled from Paris. The Viet Minh, however, are not happy with this. Surprise, surprise, and they will continue the struggle against the French. This is again an asymmetric war, a guerrilla war, and France, very much like Britain, finds itself exhausted militarily. They get to the point where in the 1950s, probably, being conservative, I think I've read in many places 75%, but I think as high as 80% or more of equipment and uniforms and everything else comes from the United States. So that is definitely an indicator of how exhausted they are militarily. And of course they're going to have a problem in a far away little outpost called, in 1954, no one can tell me, Dien Bien Phu, very good, Dien Bien Phu. Often people think of Dien Bien Phu as some foolish adventure. It is not. It was militarily sound. What happens is this: we will have an air base, and this is not the age of choppers yet. What we have are, we're going to have parachutists, and in different remote locations. So these paratroopers, all Legionnaires by the way, get airdropped in different places. From there they will carry out sorties, okay, behind enemy lines. This is in the mountains of northwestern Vietnam, and they will harass the enemy and destroy their supply lines and of course kill them and capture as many as we can, and capture intelligence and so on. As you can see by the map, Dien Bien Phu is as far away as you can get and behind enemy lines. And the problem is this: it is so remote, and by the way, it's not one garrison, but it is a series of hilltops. Okay. And what will happen, to give you a super synopsis of the battle, little by little, the battle will develop into something very reminiscent of World War I trench warfare, and each of these bastions will fall to the Viet Minh. Okay? The Viet Minh will carry, these are the grandparents of the Viet Cong, the Viet Minh will carry through the jungle over hundreds and hundreds of miles on stripped down bicycles. They don't ride the bicycle, they attach equipment to the bicycle and push the bicycle along the jungle. They will carry artillery pieces in in parts. They will carry mortars, they will carry ammunition, they will carry everything. And eventually, little by little, surround each of these outposts, and one by one they fall. And in 1954, that is a moment that, very much like 1905, when Japan squares off with Russia. Again, connecting the dots is very important in the IB exam. 1905, when the Russian Empire and Imperial Japan square off, it's a tremendous surprise. Okay, those little Asian men beat us. You know, so say the Europeans. How can this be? And these shock waves of disbelief also go through the West in 1954. That one of our allies was beaten by a bunch of ragtag communists. Well, they weren't that ragtag after all, and actually they were often even better equipped than the French. Okay, so guess what? We're going to meet, in all places, Geneva, where we met many, many times during the Cold War. Okay, and the deal is this: we're going to divide Vietnam along the 17th parallel, and we're going to have elections. We're going to have elections in the future. This was, in the opinion of this humble analyst and that of others, it was a bad deal, because think about it from a practical point of view. All right, so we're going to have elections at some point in the future. In the North, it's almost certain that 99.999% will vote communist. It's just one of these coincidences where they have, I'm being extraordinarily sarcastic by the way, and in the South, let's suppose that only 10% vote communist. Okay? Because we're going to assume that there will be a fairer election in the South than in the North. Well, guess what? That gives the majority to the communists immediately. So Others in the State Department realize this, and the partitioning of Vietnam along the 17th parallel will be permanent. Okay? You will have the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Of course, that's communist and that's North. And the Republic of South Vietnam, allied with the West, and that's the South. Okay. Every time you see in any of these, Democratic Republic, they're communist. It's a totalitarian state. It's one of the ultimate ironies of the Cold War in the 20th century. Okay. Korea. Doug MacArthur's war. And I believe that to have a true understanding of Korea, you have to have an understanding of the man that is Doug MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur, World War II hero, victory at any price, at any cost, unconditional surrender of Japan. Okay, that's the mentality of these people, whether it's Doug MacArthur or Nimitz or Patton or anyone else. We don't stop until the enemy surrenders because, in their opinion, as 20th century warriors, war is a horrible, nasty, terrible thing. You may even argue that it's an abomination. And therefore, we need to stop the abomination as soon as we possibly can. And you do that by employing all of your assets to destroy the enemy and not prolong the war. Well, as you see here in Korea, at some place we're going to change from liberation of North Korea to, well, as Harry Truman would say, truly a police action where we stop halfway. But anyway, let's go back to the roots of the Korean War. The roots of the Korean War are in World War II. Japan is defeated in 45, and you have to disarm these hundreds of thousands of Japanese men that are scattered throughout Asia. You have to disarm them. You have to, while you're disarming them also, you have to fill in the military and political vacuum that exists. You don't want to do that. You don't want to disarm them without filling that vacuum. Understand that whether these men are in Hanoi, okay, whether these men are in Burma, whether these men are in Korea, they are the law, and you need to have a sense of organization in society and law, and otherwise you're going to have rioting, and society will come apart until they are relieved. Until they are relieved, they are disarmed, okay, given something to eat, whether this takes a few weeks or a couple of months, and put on a ship and they go back to Japan. They have to remain in place, and this has to be done in an organized manner. So guess what? There's a lot of Japanese to disarm, and in Korea, we are going to do this in two parts. North of the 30th parallel, the Russians are going to do this, okay? And south of the 38th parallel, we're going to do this. And our BFF as well, which are, oh, come on, that's the Brits, okay? We're going to do this. Something strange happens wherever the Russian boot steps. Something, I find it just incredible. It's an incredible coincidence. They have a communist government. They all decide to go, they just vote unanimously to go communist. And this is what happens essentially. North Korea will be a satellite of the Soviets, and South Korea, of course, will be dependent on the West. Okay? Basically, by 1949, the U.S. and the Soviet Union have withdrawn their troops, the vast majority of their troops. There are some troops remaining. Now look at the time that this takes for these satellite states to coalesce in both areas. It was from 45 to 49, so it doesn't happen overnight. And then we're going to have a certain degree on both sides of saber rattling. The North and South saying that we want Korea to be united. And the United States, in some cases, even the United States State Department, in some cases, if you do a little research, stating that Korea really is not within our sphere of influence. Something that the acute ear of Joe Stalin and Mao Zedong are listening to, and perhaps, well, if they're not. So, June 25th, 1950, okay, another day of infantry. with the approval of the Soviet Union, okay, the war begins. And there is very much a steamroller of North Koreans that go down the Korean Peninsula. Okay. The United Nations meets. In the United Nations, we being the West, and I'm looking at it from the Western perspective, of course, we're discussing all sorts of issues, and in the issue that the Soviets find very offensive is our reluctance to add the PRC to the Security Council. And so they decide to walk out. Major mistake, because in walking out, there goes their veto. And that's the problem. And this is the problem even today with the United Nations, that in the Security Council, anything proposed in the Security Council can be vetoed. But Truman decides to intervene, and the West joins us, and we have truly a United Nations approach. All the countries of the Western world, all the pluralistic democracies, and the United States, of course, is the first amongst all these that will send the most troops and so on. But it is a United Nations. It is a United Nations endeavor. What are the options for the United Nations? We can either A, push up from the Busan perimeter, push up and fight a war of attrition as we push the communist forces back up the peninsula, or MacArthur, the genius of island hopping, will say, no, we're not going to go toe-to-toe and push the communists up. We're going to go and do an end run, as you would say in football, and outflank them and land in Incheon. And this cuts the Koreans off, the North Koreans cuts the North Koreans off. They start to fall back in desperation, okay? And things are going very well for the U.S. and for the United Nations. And again, it is the United Nations, but you know, the U.S. is first amongst equals in everyone talking about a UN. Much like recently in Libya, we had the current administration said it was a UN operation, and it was. It was on paper a UN operation, but 85% of the aircraft, 95% of the aircraft is American, and so on and so forth. All right, things are going so well that by November, late November, they're talking about being home by Christmas. Okay? However, as you should know by now, fate is something kind of strange, and it's not going to be so. It's not going to be so. Mao Zedong confers carefully with Joe Stalin, okay, the two vehicles in the communist system, okay, the old jaded men, and Joe Stalin gives them the go-ahead. 180,000 plus. I think that's a conservative estimate in the first wave. And these are all on paper volunteers. Okay? They volunteered the same way that today Cubans volunteer to cut sugarcane, as in you guys on this side of the room are volunteering to go cut sugarcane after class. Okay? They're not volunteers at all. Okay. So what happens is that you will have a seesaw. The rest of the Korean War basically is a seesaw. Past the 38th parallel, then back up, and past, and back and forth. And once again, this will also resemble, towards the end of the war, very, very much it will resemble the trench warfare of World War I. Okay. So what do you do if you're Doug MacArthur and you say to yourself, I'm the kind of warrior that wants, victory at any cost. Well, you don't see half-hearted measures. You see victory, and you see as the ultimate goal, and you see the Chinese essentially changing the nature of the war. The war used to be between us and the North Koreans, and now the Chinese are changing, like I said, the nature of the war. So therefore, the Chinese are fair game. And Doug MacArthur starts to talk about things like using Chiang Kai-shek to attack China. quite frankly, I love Doug MacArthur, but I think he was pressing it a little too far. So after much direct and indirect criticism of the Truman administration, and that's something you can't do for you guys that are still young and inexperienced in life. Maybe you get lucky and you have the kind of boss where behind closed doors you can tell him, boss, you're wrong, and blah, blah, blah. But if you're going to tell the boss that he's wrong publicly, and he's going to learn through this through newspapers and so on, which is often the case with Doug MacArthur and Harry Truman, he was asking to be fired, and this is basically what happens. Okay, in April 1951, it's up there, yeah, there it is, April 51, Harry Truman decides to relieve Doug MacArthur. Okay? This will be deadly for Harry Truman politically, okay, because Doug MacArthur is such a hero. World War II. I don't think that Harry had many choices left. So, peace talks begin, truce begins, and they will drag on. This will be probably where we have the greatest losses in Korea, because again, we're trying to maintain ourselves militarily somewhere along the 30th parallel. And we have, in this war of attrition that develops, tremendous losses. So much so that, as I said, it'll cost Harry Truman the presidency. And Dwight David Eisenhower, another tremendously credentialed World War II hero, will say through back channels, well, we'll say publicly first, I will visit Korea, and I will do something about Korea. And then through back channels, he also says, I intend to use nuclear weapons to force a settlement of Korea if one can't be reached at the peace table. Okay. Totalitarians listen to that sort of thing. Now, whether he would have done it or not, I don't know. The question, of course, and that is a rather TOK-ish question that will not need to be answered, is would that have been World War III? And if it would have been World War III, would Korea have been the place and the reason for World War III? Okay, so we're not going to carry the war to China. We're not going to carry the war to China, but we are going to we're going to eventually settle on a demarcation along the 30th parallel. And one of the things that you have to know in the IB exam is the costs. Reasons, the war itself, and then the cost. And the costs are incredible. Okay? 1,300,000 South Koreans. Okay? A large percentage civilians. 1 million Chinese. It cost Mao dearly. And the Chinese, if you look at the latest analytical studies from military men, the Chinese were generally tremendously unprepared for Korea. At the end, they do human wave tactics were very reminiscent of the Japanese, where they just attack en masse and get cut down and they get mortared and killed and machine gunned. And air power is definitely on the American side. This is not to say that it was not costly for us, okay, but still it's tremendously lopsided. About 54,000 Americans, and we've got also losses for the Australians and the British and the other people that joined us in the United Nations. Egypt, Nasser. For those of you that are antsy, there is a bathroom. If you go that way, to the right and to the left, there was a bathroom. And if you can hold on, better yet. I will talk to about 20 after, and then I'll take a 10-minute break, and then I'll continue. Okay? Okay. Okay. Nasser, the father or one of the parents of the non-aligned movement, right? I'm neutral. Except that he doesn't walk the walk. He may talk the talk, but he doesn't walk the walk. He flirts an awful lot with the Soviet Union, and that makes us uneasy. And therefore, I told you I don't follow the slides exactly. All I'm going to do is follow the slide like this. Have a tape recorder. Just record what it said. So that makes us uneasy, and therefore, in an era that is often referred to as pactomania in the 1950s. I don't think it's on the slide. Okay, but put it in your notes, pactomania, because we are uneasy about the state of the world, and therefore we form as many alliances as we possibly can. And in these alliances, you have alliances that you're familiar with, for example, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and you have the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, but you have other alliances as well. You have the Rio Pact, you have the Baghdad Pact, or CENTO. Okay? Do a little homework and look up tonight Pactomania, and you'll see the wide variety of pacts that we have. Okay? So, neutral Nasser, non-aligned Nasser, is very friendly with the Soviet Union. Okay? Will back the Algerians, which are still under the thumb of the French, and therefore, if you are the enemy of my friend, in France, okay? Although at this time the French are not entirely happy with this either, because remember, in 1954, the Dien Bien Phu, we had been sending military aid, we had been sending all sorts of things, uniforms and ammunition and whatnot. But the French also asked for perhaps to rescue the garrison in Dien Bien Phu and send in the 2nd Airborne, or the 101st. And Benito Eisenhower decides that he is not. And Benito in Spanish for the old man Eisenhower. Very wise geopolitician, decides not to send boots on the ground. And that was a little bar on the side for the French. So, but still, we're not enemies. I think we have differences of opinion. And here will come another difference of opinion as Nasser becomes friendlier and friendlier with the East, with the Soviet Union, and gets massive amounts of aid at next to nothing. The interest rate is next to nothing. This is very upsetting for us. Military equipment, 80–90% of it comes from the Soviet Union into Egypt. Makes you go, They are friendly with and recognize the People's Republic of China. And I told you about 45 minutes ago that this is one of those icons in the Cold War. Who do you recognize as the legitimate government of China? If you recognize the PRC, you're not our friend. If you recognize Taiwan, then you are our friend. All these things are adding up, and then finally, in 1956, the French, the British, and the Israelis will engage in a little adventure, and they will try to take back the Suez Canal. Nasser will say that's a no-no, but Nasser really can't stop him. So what he will do is he will scuttle as many ships as he possibly can, okay, and block the canal. You can't have it. I mean, I can't have it, but you can't either. This coordinated attack, and a highly successful attack, is frowned upon by the United States. Well, the United Nations, of course, but the United States particularly, which, again, our allies are surprised, our allies being the French and the British, they are surprised, and we do ruffle some feathers. Eisenhower, again, shows his leadership skills and his forward thinking by essentially telling our European allies, look, this looks an awful lot like imperialism, and it tastes like imperialism, and it's imperialism, and it's the wrong thing to do. At this point, and this is an interesting parallel to 2013 and geopolitics, at this point, we can really pull the strings in Western Europe because economically, we control Western Europe. We export an awful lot to Western Europe, and they buy everything that we produce, okay, from hula hoops to cars with big tail fins, and you name it. Europe, the war ends in 45. Yes, there is the quote-unquote European miracle, helped along or jump-started, of course, by the Marshall Plan. But we have a lot of influence, and we exert our influence, and the Europeans will back out. Okay, and this is the slide that I was referring to earlier. Okay, they blocked the canal by sinking many ships. In this case, it was 50 exactly. Okay? Long and short of it is that the French and the British eventually do withdraw, and by 57, the canal is reopened. There are those analysts that say that this pushes Nasser further into the Soviet camp. And there's a certain degree of validity to that. I'll buy that. But I will also, to be the honest arbitrator, point out that he had at least one foot firmly in the Soviet camp to begin with. Okay? There you have a breakdown of losses. That's a lot. And also the humiliation, important for consequences and important for the rest of the Cold War, the humiliation that Nasser and the Egyptians feel when they are attacked by the West. And they will, of course, say that given a choice, the West generally, and the United States specifically, backs the Israelis, no matter what the problem is, it will back the Israelis. As a matter of fact, there you have prima facie evidence of an Israeli and French and British operation. How much more backing do you want than that? Dominican Republic. Ready to go merengue? Any Dominicans? One Dominican? Two Dominicans? Miguelito, you're Dominican like I'm Irish. Okay? By the way, I'm not Irish. In case you missed it. All right. So anyway, 1965, Dominican Republic. Okay. Earlier, 1961, you have one of those long-established caudillos, strongmen, caudillos. The word should be in your vocabulary. Okay. Rafael Leonidas Trujillo. Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. Somoza in Nicaragua, the Somoza dynasty, Batista in Cuba, Duvalier in Haiti, strongmen that basically the country is their little farm, their finca. Okay? Well, Trujillo, like so many dictators, meets his end, and like in science, nature abhors a vacuum. Political nature abhors a vacuum. And something has to fill this vacuum. Bear that in mind. Okay, I don't have a copyright on it, but you can use it. Okay? Political nature also abhors a vacuum. Something has got to fill that vacuum. Okay? And this is what's going to happen. Okay? You've got Juan of the Dominican Revolutionary Party, Ph.D. Why? Because in Espanol is Partido Revolucionario Dominicano. And anytime you hear revolucionario anything, you know that is the radical left. Okay? He is elected in 62, inaugurated in February 63, and he is talking about agrarian reform, okay? And nationalization of foreign businesses. And to some people in the DR, that's not a big deal. To other people, that is a big deal, and it smells like communism. And in so many of these revolutions, this is what happens. Bear in mind that when the Bolsheviks come into power, they're not talking about politicization. They're talking about peace. There you go. There you go. That turns into collectivization later on. Where does the land come from? The land comes from the fact that Pierre over there has 500 acres, and he doesn't need 500 acres. So therefore, each of you get 10 acres, and Pierre gets nothing. Because Pierre is lucky to be alive and not given the 9mm heart attack. Okay? Or whatever's more expedient at the time. That is agrarian reform. That is redistribution of wealth, redistribution of land. Okay? Nationalization of industries. Well, nobody complains when it is, for example, Allende and it's Anaconda Copper. It's getting because that's the Yankees. Okay, foreign-owned company and so on. And as the nationalization comes down and down and down and down, and eventually they take Ale's little business that has 5 people working, then you're not so happy anymore, but then it's too late. So it hadn't gotten that far with Juan, okay? But it was enough so that there is a military coup that happens by General Elias Huesín y Huesín. Has nothing to do with cooking oil. You don't cook, but it's Wesson, get it? Don't explain my jokes, this is the last time I do this. All right, so anyway, Huesín y Huesín had the good fortune for him to be in control of a very elite military unit, called el Centro de Entrenamiento de las Fuerzas Armadas, or CEFA, okay? As I said, it's an elite group, okay? And you know exactly where he stands when he says things like the communist doctrine, Marxist-Leninist, Castroite, or whatever it is called. And they're going to get you. They're going to get you. And they will get Che. They'll get Che also because his philosophy did not seem to work. He felt that he was going to go into the highlands and the backwoods, so to speak, of Bolivia. He was going to talk to the peasantry, and he was going to convert the peasantry, and his ranks were going to grow exponentially, and before you knew it, there were going to be hundreds and hundreds of Bolivian peasants and so on. The indigenous people there essentially wanted very little to do with them. What they wanted to do was be left alone. Primarily, it was just that, just be left alone and live my life the way it is. So anyway, Che forms the Ejército de Liberación Nacional, the ELN. Once again, whenever you see liberation or some such verbiage, you will see you'll see the left. Okay, we talked about before that he is Argentine-born. He is a devout Marxist. He helps Fidel. Okay, and basically he feels that because Bolivia is underdeveloped, it is ripe for revolution, and the indigenous people again would join his ranks. It was not to be so. It was not to be so. Okay. Starts off with 15. Okay. And the going is extremely rough because a guerrilla needs to have a population help him, and they did help him, but they helped him marginally. They helped him as far as they needed to help him to get these armed men leave their village. And this is the picture that's often not painted when you're talking about insurgencies and when you're talking about guerrilla movements. Picture a situation where you're in some remote village where you rarely see a government official, and a group of armed men walk into your village, and you're not armed, and therefore they start to make a speech about the evils of capitalism and how you're oppressed and so on. I will bet dimes to donuts that all of you will listen. Okay, why? Because they are armed and you are not. Okay. Then they may also say, after they have this very motivational speech, that we would like some of the young men to join us in our struggle. Okay? And possibly the next step is that you will look at each other nervously and say, I don't want to go. You want to go? You may have, somebody may have to go. Somebody may have to go. But generally these people, again, the mountains of Bolivia, give him the most minimal cooperation, enough to get rid of these guerrillas. And Che will be tracked down by these elite units. He will be surrounded. Because he is receiving a minimal assistance, supplies run very low. He is having a tremendously difficult time. The life of a guerrilla is very difficult anyway. It's romanticized a lot by Hollywood, but it's very difficult. And July 1967, okay? He is captured, he is executed, and he is executed, by the way. He is told he's going to get executed. He's interrogated. For all his bravado and for all of his murderous behavior prior to being captured, and there's lots of evidence of his murderous behavior in Cuba, he enjoyed killing. When he sees death upon him, he behaves quite the coward, and he says, "Don't shoot, don't shoot. I'm worth more to you. You don't know who I am. I'm worth more to you alive than dead. My name is Che Guevara." And the Bolivians captured him, and I'm told by some reputable sources that he cooperates, but then he is told that he's going to be executed, and he is. They are not going to let him be, survivor of any kind. He's executed forensically. He is examined later on, make sure that he is who he said he was, and there he is, or his remains anyway, as he is being observed by Bolivian armed forces. Okay, October 7th, he meets his end. Often when you think of the Cold War, you think of dirty deeds by the KGB and so on, but in reality, a large percentage of these subversive activities were done by proxies like the Syrians. The Syrians and the Cubans are the major new boys of the Soviets during the Cold War, and Syrian intelligence works not only predictably, as you would imagine, in the Middle East, but also throughout Europe and in many other places by way of their airlines. Okay, if you work for Syrian Airlines, you were probably connected directly or indirectly with Syrian intelligence. They also, as we will look at in this section, they also serve to train many terrorist groups that we'll look at. Terrorist groups, Muslim-based terrorist groups, ideologically based terrorist groups, as the Bader-Meinhof gang from Germany, and we'll take a look at those. But the 70s and the 80s, very active for Syrian intelligence in the stuff they do. Okay. And there you go. At least 29 different terrorist operations as of 1986. As I mentioned earlier, Syrian Arab Airlines, the right hand of the intelligence agencies, Syrian embassies were centers also for training terrorists and facilitating their activities. Okay, and for funding these, the Syrian government devoted a sizable percentage of their GDP to subsidize these. Anyway, intelligence agencies headed by General Ali Duba, okay? PFLP, ring a bell, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Syria was behind it. Abu Nidal, Syria behind it. Al-Fatah, or just Fatah, Syria backing their things, their activities. So much so that it was, back then as now, the criticism often was, why don't a lot of these Middle Eastern governments criticize what's going on, criticize these activities? Well, quite frankly, they were afraid. They were afraid because if you criticize too loudly, and you might find yourself, getting killed. So, anyhow. Okay. Damascus, main area of these activities, and Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. Why Lebanon? Because Lebanon, remember, goes through a civil war. The fabric of society is torn apart. There is really no government. It's divided into eventually a pro-Western, mostly Christian area, and a pro-Soviet Muslim area, and divided by a green line. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at that shortly. So Lebanon was right, again, back to this idea of a vacuum, and political nature also of course of action, and the Syrians step into this vacuum. Many training camps, 20 plus. Okay. So much so that by late 1986, U.S. News and World Report, a reputable magazine, and the Washington Post report that terrorist groups are operating there. Everybody knows about this. Not only Western intelligence, but it is widely known that they're being funded. And there you have Bader-Meinhof, okay? The Armenian Secret Army, Japanese Red Army, Kurdish Labor Party, Pakistani Az-Zulfikar, Tamils, the Moros in the Philippines, remember they're Muslims, the Shia, Hezbollah, should ring a bell now? All of these, the Syrians have got their finger in the pie or are taking the pie directly. Okay. So much so that in 1986, Parisians were shocked, okay, because there was a series of explosions throughout Paris. Okay. Beautiful Paris is brought down a la Boston today, but Boston many times over. And that is the Lebanese Armed Revolutionary Faction, LARF. They are also implicated. You can't prove these things. You can't prove these things. It's not outright. But, you know, it's to the point where you suspect it and everything points in that direction. But that's the nature of clandestine operations, that if they're done well, there is no absolute proof, and if you're waiting for absolute proof, it's not going to happen. But they've assassinated a large number of Americans, Europeans, and Israeli diplomats in Europe themselves. Okay. And again, allegedly, the Syrians are behind all this. Okay. September 1986, Pierre Marion, former director of the French General Directorate of External Security, basically their CIA, okay, says that in the early 80s, Syrian intelligence agents had organized terrorist groups who operated in France as well as throughout Europe, and this is because they want to punish France for their involvement in Lebanon. Okay. Nasty stuff. Jordan, which was and still is often friendly to the West, at this point is harassed often by intelligence agents, and not only harassed, but of course, you know, there are death threats and the threat of being turning on your car in the morning and it goes to boom. Okay. Arafat at one point is seen by the Syrians and by the Soviets, of course, because ultimately the Soviets are behind all this, as waffling, okay, and being too moderate. And his chief of staff, Sayyidi, is killed near a Syrian checkpoint in the Bekaa Valley in '82. They will kill all the Muslims, and they will kill rather other Arabs as well. Okay. Back to my statement a little while ago that they are often hesitant to be too critical because what the thing may be. U.S. Department of State, in Patterns of Global Terrorism, 1983, charges Syria with encouraging radical Shia Lebanese group, Islamic Jihad. Does that ring a bell? Should ring a bell. Okay? And they're carrying out suicide bombings against the United States Embassy in Beirut and in other places. And this becomes a pattern that is still haunting us today. The suicide bombing, if you will. The seeds, again, are planted, and often people forget, they're planted by the Soviet Union and its proxies during the Cold War. It's interesting to see, and I encourage my students to do it, and it only takes a minute. Pick a leader, in the Middle East, and then look at a Gaddafi, for example. Look at a Gaddafi in the 70s, in the late 60s, and you will see and go to Google Images and Google a Gaddafi in that time period, and you will see a very Sovietized Gaddafi, bemedaled, okay, in khakis, and very much the cookie cutter of a Soviet-style officer, okay? And then Google a Gaddafi, you know, in the 90s or in 2000 or so on, and then you see when there is no more Soviet Union to lean upon, and then you'll see the quote-unquote Muslim version, the Bedouin Gaddafi, the one that goes to New York City and insists that he has to have a tent and a rug, and, you know, a la the true Bedouin that I am, because this is what appeals to my people now. So this is the time period, of course, when the people pulling the strings were the Soviets, and they are the Soviet clones to a large degree. Do it. I think you'll find it interesting. Anyhow, so we go to Rhodesia, 71 to 79. Okay. So you have a situation in southern Africa. Let me paint a big picture for you. You have a situation in southern Africa, in Rhodesia and South Africa itself, where you have white minority governments in power. Okay? They have been colonized centuries ago. They are, in the case of South Africa, they will use apartheid, which is a system of separation, and it is also a system where they ideologically can justify what they're doing on paper. So take South Africa as an example. This is not applicable to Rhodesia, but it is, Rhodesia is the state that will lean upon the existence of South Africa to ensure its own existence. But the South Africans will say in apartheid that what we're doing is we are, again, this is from the perspective of the rhetoric used by the South Africans, we are giving autonomy to little tribal groups. Okay, so here you have the ABC tribe in this area, okay, and they stay in this area and they have autonomy in this area. And you have the XYZ tribe over here, and so forth and so on, and they have autonomy, and wouldn't this be what you want? Well, on paper this works, but what happens also is that then they are isolated and they are dependent on the South African government to travel from one area to the next. Since you're traveling out of your tribal homeland, quote unquote, then you need a special passport, which is a restriction on your travel, and it is a way to control you, and so forth and so on. So you can see the impractical purposes, the impractical outcome of what they're using. Okay, so much so that in the 70s and the 80s, these governments are being isolated more and more internationally. Okay, and you have at the height of the Cold War, you have the Soviets and the Chinese supporting guerrilla groups in these areas. Rhodesia, which does not exist now because it is now called, it's up there, Zimbabwe. Never ask you a question where the answer is up there already. They will be fighting the front for the liberation of Zimbabwe, okay? And they will also, like in Mozambique and Angola, as we see later on, they will be fighting leftists. They will be fighting leftists. Either the Soviets or the Chinese are on one side. Sometimes they are in competition with each other. Okay, and then you're going to have the uncomfortable situation for the West in general and for the United States specifically, that they say to themselves, well, what do we do about this situation? Do we back a Rhodesia? Do we back a South Africa with the intent to modify their behavior at a future date? Or do we cut them off and therefore lose that domino to the communist side, and we can't modify their behavior? And ultimately we know that the existence of those people under communism will be arguably much worse than it would be under their present situation. That's the situation faced in Rhodesia, where, like the Portuguese I mentioned in Angola and other places, there's a power vacuum, and somebody's going to win this war. So who do we back? Well, in Rhodesia, there is a gentleman by the name of Ian Douglas Smith, okay? And he is essentially appealing to the West, and he is saying, my country is in a state of emergency. It is surrounded by hostile Marxist states and Marxist movements, and we need your help. The United States and Great Britain are, well, they're going to help. They're going to help not with boots on the ground, but they're going to help, and at the same time try to pressure this government to ease up on its policies, on its racist policies. And it's a difficult situation again, because if you don't back them, if you decide to walk home and say, okay, you're on your own now, then they'll fall to communists. And but the United States it's a balancing act, and they're trying to walk a fine line. So how far do you push the Rhodesians? Okay. The Rhodesians become difficult because their government is not often accused of not negotiating in goodwill, okay? And they are unwilling to relinquish political power. And the disadvantage on the African side is that they're limping along let's just, okay, the metaphor escapes me right now. Their problem is the same problem they've had for decades before that, and that is tribalism, okay? So that I may be oppressed by the Rhodesian government, but my loyalty is to the ABC tribe, and you're from the XYZ, and you and I really don't have anything in common, you know, from my perspective. So this is beneficial to the Rhodesians, not beneficial to the liberation movement. Add to that the complication that the ABC tribe may be funded by the Soviets, and the XYZ tribe, their guerrilla movement, if they're on the left, may be funded by the PRC. There are ideological differences within the communists, and often they're not only fighting the Rhodesian government, but they're fighting each other. Anyway, 78, things start to go south when the guerrillas attack one of the main cities, Umtali, and this is also a turning point. This is also a turning point because it forces the Rhodesian government to reach an agreement, which happens in 1978, where you see this individual come to the forefront, okay? Desmond Tutu. And long and the short of it, you will have belatedly a black majority government take place in Rhodesia, okay? Under Bishop Adel Musorahuer. Okay, back to the factions that I was talking about a little earlier. You've got two factions that will continue to fight each other. Joshua Nkomo from the Kalanga tribe and Robert Mugabe from the Shona tribe. Okay? They're not going to be happy with the agreement, and they will continue fighting. Okay? This is going to continue until 1979, when they're going to meet again in London. Okay? And eventually they will hammer out an agreement there that is acceptable to everyone. However, the country has experienced years and years of warfare, and the country is weak, and you're talking about a developing country to begin with, and this just adds more grief and a lower GDP and so forth. Mugabe will eventually unite Rhodesia, but as in so many developing countries, Mugabe will come in as a unifier. He promises all sorts of things, and then at the end, he becomes quite the dictator, and if not a dictator, an authoritarian figure, depending on the country, and the country never prospers the way it should under Mugabe. So much so that he will try to remain in power. He's going to go to the epitome of authoritarianism. He's going to go to the North Koreans and have his security forces trained by the North Koreans. And as a result of that, the people in Zimbabwe suffer tremendously. Okay. Lebanon. Okay. The Paris of the Middle East. Paris of the Middle East is going to have a problem. And that is that when the French pull out, they will leave behind a government that is a coalition government, okay? Established in 1943, where they will share power. They'll share power between the Christian population, and they'll share power between the Muslim population. However, that worked all right in 43. Oh, there's also a rotation of cabinet positions and the presidency and so on. That works all right for a while, but the Muslim population keeps growing, and the Christian population does not keep pace. And of course, you know, that's going to create an unstable situation. The Christians belong to the Phalangists, by and large. They belong to the Phalangists. Phalange, just as the same Phalange as in Spain, not the same party, but it's the same Phalange. You say to yourself, it rang a bell. That's what rings a bell. Okay, especially the Maronite Christians belong to the Phalangists. And more and more of the Muslim side will be supported by the Palestine Liberation Organization, which you know as the PLO, and Yasser Arafat's people. And at that time, the PLO very much is entwined with Soviet policies, and they are the du bois of the Soviet Union. Okay, 1975, things come to a head when one side kills, presumably the Muslim side, kills 4 Christian phalangist, okay, on an attempt on another Phalangist leader. Okay? And what will happen is that the Phalange then will retaliate. And this is a common occurrence throughout the Middle East. This side hits, and it will be hit back by the next side, and then the other side is not happy again, they'll hit back again, and it just escalates and escalates and escalates. So much so that areas of the country will become little strongholds guarded by very violent militias that will, if all they did is guard their own neighborhood, that would be pretty bad because there is no central authority, but they also make forays into other neighborhoods and therefore add fuel to the fire and add civil war. Okay? And this is what happens, and this is basically what this slide is. Things escalate, and the fighting spreads throughout the country. Okay? Now, there is an organization within each country that is vital in the case of chaos and confusion. And no matter how many militias there are, of course we don't relate to this as Americans because we haven't faced anything since the Civil War that's anything remotely similar to this. But that organization is the Army. Okay? At this point so far, the Army is standing on the sidelines. The Lebanese Army is standing on the sidelines. That is going to change. That is going to change. Okay? And that's the slide, as I was referring to. There's till 75, no decisive edge. You will have you'll have this flowing back and forth. One side gains some ground, the other side loses some ground, and that the situation may change and reverse itself a week later. Okay, but we're leaving out the obvious one, and the obvious is that the country is suffering. GDP is going down. Infrastructure is not being attended to. There's no law except law by force. What can be achieved by force of arms, and the country is being factionalized more and more and more. The Lebanese army, which had been on the sidelines now, okay, because they don't want to get involved, is threatening to become involved and bring its heavy weaponry into the situation. The question is, what will be the outcome of this? On which side will it be on? Will the Lebanese army be a neutral force, a force of fairness, or be on one side or the other? Okay. Well, things seem to look good in 76. A 17-point plan is put together, okay, and is referred to as the constitutional document. Okay? That is February. By March, however, this is history, because the Lebanese army has divisions within itself. There are some people that are going to go to the Christian side, and many more will go to the Muslim side. Okay? There is dissidence, and in that month, dissident troops, Muslim troops, led by Lieutenant Khatib, mutiny, and they create a different organization called the Lebanese Arab Army. Okay? They joined the Lebanese National Movement, and they attacked those Christian-held areas in Beirut. Okay? So much so that they even attacked the presidential palace, making the president flee. Can you imagine that? That hasn't happened in our country since 1812. Okay? Okay. 1976 is also a keynote year because Syria, remember Syria? They will intervene militarily. And they will not be the honest arbitrators. They, of course, are going to A, subjugate the people of Lebanon, and B, impose their leftist regime, which is friendly to the Soviet Union. Okay? However, in 76 October, Syria chooses to participate in a peace conference in Saudi Arabia. Okay? This is followed by an Arab League meeting, for those of you who are studying peace and that area of the IBO curriculum. And this peace conference formally ends the Lebanese Civil War. Okay? But problems are still there. Okay, you've got a Muslim side and you have a Christian side, and that's a burning ember that even today, you know, fast forward to 2013, is still there. Not like it was once. Lebanon has recovered largely economically, but that is still there. And as a result of that, you have many expatriates, many Christian expatriates down in the West. Okay. Cost of the war, huge by the standards of a small country like that. Okay. 180,000 wounded, 44,000 dead. Okay. For many decades, Beirut is reduced to rubble. Okay. Angola, Mozambique, and other parts of Africa. Who feels this is information overload? Will survive. Yes. Deep breath, deep breath. Okay. Cuban coffee and a deep breath. Huh? There's no joke of the day. I've been recycling jokes for the longest time.
But they don't know that. They don't know that. They don't know that.
Calling on the Soviet Union. They existed.
What these upstarts are talking about is that typically I start my classes with a joke. Okay? And, oh boy, it'll be a Soviet joke. I don't have to do it all Soviets. Right? So, since we're doing the Cold War, I might as well do the Soviets. So I'll make it a quick one, and make it a quick sidebar. So it goes like this. All right, you guys bear with me. I'm quoted from recycling my jokes forever. A little old man in Moscow, okay, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and they knock on the door, and 1 o'clock in the morning, with his feet, he nervously goes to the door, okay, opens the door, and there is a 7-foot hooded, mysterious figure dressed in black, and you can't see his face. You can only see his hands and their skeletal, okay, and he says, "Ivan, I've come for you." "Who are you? Who are you?" "I am death." "Oh my God, thank God. I thought it was a KGB. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Don't applaud, send money. I'm over-educated every day.
You should tell Peter.
Why? No, Peter, you will not say a joke. Let's talk about Angola and Africa and Portugal and as I said before, the vacuum created by the Portuguese saying adios to Africa and their colonial empire, and once again a vacuum being created that must be filled. Okay, and as you will see, those of you, especially those of you studying peace agreements and so on, by the early 60s, many European powers, except for the French don't seem to get it, and they try to hold on to Algeria forever, but they won't. They'll have to let go eventually in 62. But the British are anxious to have their colonies go their way. Okay, whether you're ready or not, it almost seems like whether you're ready or not, we want to move you along, and we have a welfare state to take care of, and well, we've got enough of an expenditure as it is. And this is the case. This is the case with the Portuguese. They exit quickly, and they leave no infrastructure behind. And infrastructure, in this case, not only means roadways and telegraph and so on, but the people govern. And therefore, you will have FNLA, Frente Nacional de Liberación de Angola. I said it in Spanish. Any Portuguese out there will forgive me. Okay? And UNITA. Okay? Unión Nacional para la Independencia Total de Angola. Okay? And MPLA. Okay? Movimiento Popular de la Liberación de Angola. Some are right, and some are left, and some are kind of leftist. Okay? So, which is which and what happens? Okay? and it will be a long, drawn-out conflict, a long, drawn-out war of attrition that will cost the Angolan people dearly, okay? And which the strings are going to be pulled from all sorts of different directions. As I mentioned earlier, there is a schism, you should know this by now, between the USSR and the PRC. Okay, one faction, one leftist faction is going to be funded by the PRC, another leftist faction will be funded by the USSR. UNITA, for example, will be funded by the West, and irony of all ironies, South Africa will be helping UNITA. Huh? Well, not why me again, Céspedes. Yes, South Africa, okay, the racist regime of South Africa, okay, because in politics, you know the old saying, the enemy of my enemy. Right? If I'm going to have a Marxist regime next door, I will help this black guerrilla group. Okay, so anyone can be your ally, and anyone can be your friend, and allies today are enemies tomorrow. So the United States, Portugal, Brazil, and South Africa support FNLA and eventually UNITA more than FNLA. Okay? The Soviet Union and Cuba, which sends large numbers of troops, and you may know some Cubans who served in Angola, and don't hold it against them. They had no other choice. They just go. It is not a volunteer type thing. It is an army by conscription, and at a certain age you serve for X number of years, okay, and you just go. So Cuba, Eastern Europe, PRC, and North Korea supports the MPLA. And you have the respective flags over there, which you don't have to identify for the ID exam. Okay. Cuba will not only be in Angola, but in Mozambique, as they would say in North America, and lots of other places throughout Africa. Ethiopia, okay, and well, all in all, there's 17 different leftist governments are supported by Cuba and the USSR because the equipment is Soviet. Much like the French in the 50s, where 75–85% of their equipment and their ordnance and everything else is supplied by the United States. Same thing happens with Cuba. 75–85% or more, probably that's even conservative, I would say more like 90–95% is supplied by the Soviet Union. And there you have Fidel with different regimes. I'm sure who the guy on the left is. The guy on the right is Mengistu Haile Mariam from Ethiopia. Haile Selassie, as you should know by now, was overthrown, and a leftist regime took its place in ruling Ethiopia with an iron hand. Okay. Generally, the Soviets and the Cubans were successful wherever they went by virtue of the fact that they were ruthless. If there was a village that was suspected of being, say, pro-UNITA, they come up to the village and rocket the village, and then send in troops, and then just massacre as many people as they possibly could. They were relatively ruthless in their. They did not buy into, or so it seems, this hearts and minds business. If I got you by the throat, your mind will follow. There's a variation of that saying. We won't. This is polite company, and we will not use that variation. Also, you can imagine what it is. Algeria, Zaire, Yemen, Ethiopia, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, lots and lots of places. Lots of places. Okay, MPLA. First fights against FNLA. Okay, you got your diagram. You're going to need it. Then they're going to turn against UNITA. Okay, and they will momentarily chase UNITA out of Angola and into neighboring Rwanda. Okay, at that time, UNITA seems to be on the ropes, but UNITA will come back. Okay. By '76, MPLA controls most of the government, okay? But UNITA and FNLA will refuse to play dead, and they come back, and they do that from neighboring Zaire and Zambia, and they renew their guerrilla warfare, and the struggle goes on. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, South Africans are going to step in because again they don't want a Marxist neighbor next door, so I am willing to help a pro-Western black guerrilla group as long as it helps me. It is logical from a selfish perspective, okay? And also you have mercenaries from all over Europe and from all over the world. White mercenaries go into Rhodesia or South Africa or Angola and try to do their part. And their logic and their rationale is that they're fighting communism. Okay? And much like back to connecting the dots and thinking out of the box, which is what the IB exam is all about. Okay? Very much like you have volunteers in the A. Lincoln Brigade and so on intervening. You have outsiders basically intervening in the Spanish Civil War. For whatever reasons you think they may be, noble as they may be, you are an outsider, and you're coming into Spain to try to change things, to see make things go your way. Well, likewise, these people are doing the same thing. Okay? Being backed by South Africa, UNITA lets South African forces maintain bases in their territory for raids into Namibia or Southwest Africa. Okay? And by the early 80s, UNITA guerrillas have extended their control to central and southeast Angola. So they're making a comeback. Okay? They win support of the British. They win support of the French, the United States, and Saudi Arabia. And meanwhile, MPLA is backed by the Soviet Union and Cuba. You can imagine what this continuous warfare did to the economy, to an already poor country, as we have seen in other places. Whether it's Lebanon or now Angola or so on, GDP just ceases to function, and GDP actually goes into other numbers. Okay? Fast forward a little bit to 1988, and there are talks mediated and led by the United States. Peace agreement is signed. South Africa decides to remove its troops, okay? And things look good. Okay? For a while, things look good, but then there is fighting that continues. Okay? And Dos Santos and UNITA, Jonas Savimbi, are at each other's throats. Something happens in 1991, though, that will change the board, the rules of the game. And by now you know that 1991 is a pivotal year because there is a nation state that ceases to exist by the name of the Soviet Union, the USSR. Okay? No USSR, no rich daddy to fund your operations, and therefore the Cubans also say adios to Angola in May of 91, followed by more negotiations, and Dos Santos and Savimbi sign a peace treaty in the mother country, Lisbon, okay, and officially ends the fighting. And if you kept track, that was 16 years. 16 years of civil war, hundreds of thousands of dead, hundreds of thousands of wounded and amputated because of landmines and all sorts of nasty things. And certainly a war of attrition. If you talk to, and I have talked to some of those veterans, some of those Cuban veterans, where often no quarter was asked for and no quarter was given, and it got very nasty. And again, those guys were there because they were told to be there, not because they really believed in the system or believed in communism. Is either go there or your family back in Cuba will suffer. There are those that drank the Kool-Aid and believed in the ideology and so on, but a great many more that just had to be there. Okay, let's talk about Grenada, or Grenada. Okay. It is 1979, and things are happening in Grenada. Okay. There is a political party called the New Jewel Movement. Okay. They are Marxist-Leninists. Okay. They believe in other words, if you're a Marxist-Leninist, you believe in a cadre of intellectuals and highly dedicated ideologues, a small group that will lead the rest of the proletariat. And this is their vision for Grenada, little Grenada. And if you look at Grenada, it is but a little more than a speck in the Caribbean. Okay, they overthrow and execute their prime minister, Maurice Bishop. They also killed his pregnant wife and anyone that's a follower that they can get their hands on. And this is not surprising because it's par for the course for all communist regimes throughout the 20th century and now into the 21st century. Okay? The United States is not gonna put up with this, and they organize they will eventually organize an overthrow of the regime. They will also bring along the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. Remember hours ago that I mentioned Pactomania? Here is another pact, the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States, or Caribbean if you prefer. Now, you know that 80% plus of the boots on the ground is going to be Uncle Sam, right? But the other 20% or less, probably much less, will be Barbados, Jamaica, and other states in the Caribbean that will make this, on paper, an international endeavor. Okay? Okay. The justification for this is not only an ideological justification, but also the fact that Grenada at that time is a haven for medical students. You can go to Grenada, study medicine, and 3 or 4 years or however many years at a much lower price than the United States, and get a medical degree, which of course is not recognized in the United States. But what they do recognize is the background. You take a medical exam, you take the exam in the United States, okay? And if you pass the exam, you're a doctor, okay? And you got that at a much lower cost than going to U of M or wherever they go, okay? There are about 1,000 medical students or so. Well, 1,000 Americans, about 600 medical students, and being a part of the evil capitalist imperialists, when the leftists take over in Grenada, they are threatened, and they're harassed, and they're afraid to leave the campus, and they're afraid for their lives, and this is when you do what you should all do as American citizens. When you get on the telephone and you call your congressman, first you're going to call your mother, of course, and then you're going to call your congressman, and then say, do something about this, get me the hell out of here. And at this time, they will do that. They will do that. They will get you the hell out of here after they send in the U.S. Marines and the 82nd Airborne and lots of others. So there's a combined invasion force of about 10,000 troops, okay? And that's more than enough to do the job. And they defeat the Grenadian army, okay? Austin is deposed. Okay? The American students are rescued. They're happy to see the American forces that arrive. Okay? They're greeted with hugs and kisses, and really, if you do a little, everything's on YouTube. If you do a little research, they're jumping for joy, and they're also scared on report. Okay? Did we overreact in Grenada? Perhaps it is arguable, but this is not arguable. Grenada was, in the scheme of things, being converted to a little fortress. They had about 1,500 Grenadian soldiers being trained by the Cubans. They had hundreds of Cuban advisors. All the people that were there, you have to understand, and usually not mentioned in the press and not mentioned in some of your textbooks. If you're there and you're constructing an airfield, and you dig a little bit, well, that airfield is, say, and I'm not a pilot, so X number of times larger than it needs to be to accommodate that many more aircraft that fit the Soviet, the Soviet specs for landing aircraft and so on. You also had advisors from, of course, the Soviet Union, North Korea, East Germany, Bulgaria, Libya. Makes you go, okay. A lot of the workers that are there were dressed, that were Cubans, were dressed in civilian clothing, but they were military personnel. Okay. Criticized by our enemies in the United Nations, but at the time it enjoys incredible public support, and especially by those people that were rescued, and ultimately, and here the proof is in the pudding, by the people of Grenada, who made October 25th, a national holiday called Thanksgiving, not because they have turkey, or they might, who knows, not typically they don't, but because they were rescued by the good old US of A. Flight 007. Flight 007. We felt that Pearl Harbor was a day that would live in infamy. I remember this day vividly, and it was a day that lived in infamy, and everyone in the West generally was outraged, and everyone in the U.S. especially so. And, well, let me tell you about 007. It was so much so that some people thought that, you know, might have been a pretext to get back the Soviets somehow. Because there is a Korean Airlines flight which happened to be numbered 007. Has absolutely nothing to do with James Bond or espionage or anything like that. Okay? And Roger Moore was not there. Well, it's not Roger Moore anymore. The new guy. That's it. The young whippersnappers know their name. I stopped after Roger Moore. I stopped keeping track of it. Anyway, Flight 007. It is a commercial airlines flight. It is a 747. It is flying from New York City, obviously in the United States, to Seoul, South Korea. Okay? It's a flight like any other flight. It is intercontinental. It's going over the Pacific. And it is August 30th of 1983. Okay? And it's carrying a full load of passengers, mommies, daddies, children, old people, young people. Okay? They will refuel temporarily in Anchorage. Remember, they start in New York. It is a long, long, exhausting flight. Okay? And they will refuel in Anchorage and keep going on their long trans-Pacific flight to Seoul, which is South Korea, guys. South Korea. Okay? And South Korea, of course, it is an ally of the United States. It is a democratic state. Okay? Okay. 22 children under the age of 12. Okay? We have a congressman on board from Georgia. And then from there, they plan to go to different places, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Taiwan. Okay, but they were going to land in Seoul. Okay. September 1st, 1983, Soviet interceptors shoot down the airplane over the Sea of Japan. Why? Because they strayed temporarily over Soviet territory. When they were shot down, they were not in Soviet territory. And they strayed temporarily for a few moments over Soviet territory. Of course, passenger airliners are not constructed in such a way to evade, MiGs and air-to-air missiles and so on, and they're just, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Okay? Of course, all of them died. Correction, they were all murdered. You kill the enemy dies. When innocents are killed, that's called murder. Okay? Initially, like so often in the past, the Soviets, for so many things, the Soviets denied that they did this or they had any knowledge of what happened. Okay? We found out even more information after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. But of course, the outrage worldwide is incredible, and these people just didn't disappear. It wasn't a malfunction. So, what do we have to say? Well, we have to say it was a spy mission, okay? Which was fairly idiotic, but that's the best they could come up with. It is a spy mission. The airliner was spying on the Soviets. Okay. Part of the information that we've ascertained since 1991 comes from General Anatoly Kornukov, commander of the Sokol Air Base. Okay. He will later become the commander of the Russian Air Force. That should tell you something already. That means that nothing happened to him. Okay. He says that there's no need to identify or to bother with the fact whether the aircraft was civilian or military, since the quote-unquote intruder had already flown over Kamchatka, which is Soviet. Okay. Okay. Izvestia grants an interview in 1991. Or rather, General Osipovich grants an interview to Izvestia in 1991. He's the pilot of the interceptor that shot down the aircraft. And he speaks about the incident. And he says that as he is flying and he is radioing his supervisors, his superiors, he can see that the aircraft, he can see clearly the aircraft. He sees that it is a passenger airliner. He can see the blinking lights. He Okay, military aircraft, when they are going to attack, do not have blinking lights to be identified. They try to go in dark and quick and low. This was at an altitude of passenger airlines, airliner. The blinking lights were on. The lights were inside the cabins. I mean, the thing is totally illuminated. He saw people reading. He saw children being mischievous and jumping from one seat to another. Okay? Yet, he presses the button and murders these people. Okay? Of course, the thing goes down, and if you're lucky, you die instantly, and if not, you have a horrible death as you guys are plunging into the cold northern waters of the Pacific. And of course, you know you're not going to last there. If you by some miracle, you survive that crash, which is extraordinarily unlikely, you're not going to survive very long in these frigid waters. Within 30 seconds or so, you're quite literally a popsicle. Okay? Japanese fishermen that are in these waters, depending on where they are and the angle, they hear and they see a bright flash. Okay? They hear an explosion. Okay? They smell aviation fuel. Okay? And the rest is history. There is never any attempt to rescue survivors because there aren't going to be any survivors. But we're going to have a mission to see what we can recover. Perhaps we can recover a few bodies. Perhaps we can recover some more evidence. Okay? The Soviets at every turn interfere. The Soviet Navy goes out and interferes as much as they possibly can with these missions, adding insult to injury and adding insult to the world, what the world feels at this time. And such is the modus operandi of the extreme left throughout the 21st century and the 20th century. And even before that, in 1848, as the communards do their thing in Paris, they even planned at that point to murder the Bishop of Paris. That is their modus operandi. Always has been, always will be. You can argue with me about that, and that's okay, you were entitled to be wrong. So anyhow, 1945 to 1991, active measures. Active measures. Okay? A way of saying, collecting intelligence, a way of saying employing various degrees of violence, putting bombs, forging documents, assassinating, political repression, penetration of front organizations, where the organization may, outwardly stand for peace and may outwardly stand for all sorts of nice things, but the strings are being pulled by the KGB. Okay? And such is the verbiage, active measures being used. Okay? And that's what I was just talking about, the international front organizations. For example, there is the World Peace Council. Now, who wouldn't want to belong to the World Peace Council? You have to be crazy not to belong to it. Well, you would, but it just so happens that much of their agenda is in sync with what the Soviets want done. Now, I try to be the honest arbitrator of history. This is not to say that we didn't do the same thing. We also have front organizations. The Ford Foundation, for example, as my students know, would fund all sorts of magazines and radio stations and so on to broadcast into Eastern Europe. And Ford Foundation, nonprofit organization. I mean, who can criticize that? Well, this is part of the war. That's part of the war that's called the Cold War. Okay? Opposition parties, say for example Allende in Chile. Wars of national liberation, as we have discussed a dozen or more already. Insurgency groups, terrorist groups, Bader-Meinhof and so on, and all the other ones that we have. Intelligence gathering, assassinations, like we saw with Syrian officials, with Lebanese officials. Okay? General Oleg Kalugin describes active measures as the quote-unquote heart and soul of Soviet intelligence. He is saying, in other words, this is what we're all about. If it is the heart and soul. And there is Time magazine with a very clever cover. And this is what you should always do in the IBO. Okay? Okay. that part. Okay, and this is a long one also, so I will, in the interest of time, just touch on certain things. And ever so lightly touch. I thank you for your attention. I know that you're tired. I've had a long day also. My day starts at 5 o'clock in the morning. As I get up and say hello to Charlie Brown and people. Charlie Brown, my boss. Okay. It is the 1970s, and yours truly and many other people like me wonder who is winning the Cold War, because after all, we seem to be fragile, and the Soviets and the Tricoms seem to be, as to use some verbiage from the Cold War, they seem to be monolithic and very strong, and their economy does not falter, and their economy is not subject to the ups and downs of a market economy, and they seem to be growing militarily every year. And if you look at a map of the world, the Soviet Union, and I think I've got one here someplace, nope, not there. Well, I'll do this then. As you look at a map of the world, the Soviet Union is huge. It has vast resources. It exports oil. It is definitely a contender. Perhaps at that point, the dominant superpower. They are at par with us with nuclear weapons. Perhaps some analysts say they're even surpassing us a little bit with nuclear weapons. And look at the landmass of the Soviet Union. Look at the landmass of the PRC. Understand that by this time, Southeast Asia can also be painted red. Okay, as the dominoes did fall in Southeast Asia. Cuba painted red. Central America, at this point, is debatable which way it's going. Okay, in Nicaragua, the war of ideology is going on. In neighboring El Salvador, the war of ideology is going on. Often the United States finds itself, again, in this situation mentioned earlier, if we're backing a right-wing or an authoritarian regime, is this better than, I mean, it's morally debatable, but is it better to just turn away and perhaps risk that country going communist? And so often we don't. You know, who is winning? Who is winning? And it is debatable. It is debatable. And here, of course, that slide talks about the Vietnam War, and so on. So much so that perhaps it is time to reassess our game plan. And you have a consummate, whatever you may feel about him, you have a consummate geopolitician by the name of Richard Nixon approaches the PRC and says, this idea of detente can also work with the PRC, and perhaps we can widen the schism between the Soviets and the Chinese. Okay. Also, we're going to enter, since the Soviets are catching up, or indeed in many aspects perhaps passing us up or passing us by, let's reduce the number of nukes. Therefore, solve one. Okay. That's the map I was referring to. The U.S. and its allies, 1960, 45 to 1960. Okay? From a later perspective of the 70s and 80s, this would be the good old days. Look at this. Dark blue and light blue, U.S. and its allies. Okay? White, allied colonies. Because remember, all of these countries in Africa are colonies. Perhaps colonies on the way out, but still closely tied to the West. Okay? Dark red, the Soviet Union and its allies. Pink, okay, as in you're talking the non-aligned talk but not walking the walk, like Egypt, okay, and some of the places in the Middle East. Okay? But mostly it looks good. I think you would agree. Then things change. The world changes. Perhaps not for the better. Okay, U.S. and its allies. American military assistance. All that white stuff kind of disappeared. Okay? Soviet Union and its allies. Soviet military assistance. Look at all that. Okay? So that's why many people are wondering. Okay? And we've got plenty of problems with Central and South America, okay, which we try to correct with Operation Condor, Green Belt, yes. Okay. Then we have James Earl Carter coming to the White House. He has problems in Central America with the Sandinistas. He has problems in El Salvador. Lots and lots of problems. Okay. And he is concerned primarily with human rights. Remember, human rights. Okay. Ron is going to change this, and he is going to actively support the anti-communist movement. So much so that with Ron, you could argue it's no longer containment. Okay, up to that point it had been containment, but many argue, much more astute than I have argued, that it is more like pushback. Okay, a term that was actually used during the Eisenhower administration, but here we really do have pushback. We're gonna give them a taste of their own medicine, and if you can fund a guerrilla movement, so can we. So therefore, we will fund Nicaragua will fund a Contra group, and in Afghanistan, the Ph.D. group, and so on, and give them a taste of their own medicine. That's wrong. Okay? Therefore, there's Comrade Brezhnev in front of a poster of Lenin. We do this, and change the dynamics of the Cold War. So much so that we see cracks begin to form in this seemingly monolithic nation or regime. Okay? Central planning has many inconsistencies and creates disincentivization. If everything belongs to everyone, then nothing belongs to anyone, is the bottom line. Okay? But Brezhnev can't change things because there are entrenched interests. There is the nomenclatura, the big names. There's the paparazzi, which may not be the great names, but still, I'm a central person of this factory, and people need me. Okay? And these people don't want change. They would rather have a Band-Aid than true change. So much so that look what happens. From 1970 to 1975, okay, the 95-year plan. Remember, the Soviets operate on a centrally planned economy, right? Okay. Growth rate of about 3%. Horrible. 75 to 80, between 1 and barely 2%. Then 80 to 85, again, barely, between 0.5% and barely 2%. Okay. Then you also have to keep Eastern Europe tied to you economically, and you can't let them go. So that's a drain on your economy. While you're doing all of this, 1/3 of your GNP, 1/3 is only 1/3 is on capital investment. Pardon, contact lens movement. 1/3 is on capital investment, with most of that going to the military. Okay, and then we're going to have the straw that breaks the camel's back, called Afghanistan. Okay. By this time, the stagnant Soviet economy is under incredible pressure. We are going to be, if you're the Soviets, we're going to be in a situation where we want to hold on to Afghanistan because we are looking covetously at Central Asia and its oil and gas reserves, and perhaps we can get this. We're 1 foot closer. Okay. However, starting with Jimmy as James Carter and picking up speed with Ron Reagan, we're going to start helping the Mujahideen. Okay. Jimmy Carter. So, June 25th, 1950. Okay, another day of infamy. With the approval of the Soviet Union, okay, the war begins, and there is very much a steamroller of North Koreans that go down the Korean Peninsula. Okay, the United Nations meets. In the United Nations, we being the West, and I'm looking at it from the Western perspective, of course. We're discussing all sorts of issues, and in the issue that the Soviets find very offensive is our reluctance to add the PRC to the Security Council. And so they decide to walk out. Major mistake, because in walking out, there goes their veto. And that's the problem. And this is the problem even today with the United Nations, that in the Security Council, anything proposed in the Security Council can be vetoed. But Truman decides to intervene, and the West joins us, and we have truly a United Nations approach. All the countries of the Western world, all the pluralistic democracies, and the United States, of course, is the first amongst all these that will send the most troops and so on. But it is a United Nations. It is a United Nations endeavor. What are the options for the United Nations? Will do things. Well, he will send some aid. Like I said, it picks up exponentially picks up speed under Ron Reagan. Jimmy Carter will also cancel as a show of his displeasure of the Olympic Games. He will cancel contracts for shipping grain to the Soviets. This will cost him his presidency, however, because the American farmer is unhappy with the fact that now he had a good deal and that's gone. And a lot of athletes are unhappy. A lot of sports fans are unhappy. I think morally it was the right thing to do, but it will cost him. And Ron Reagan will just bring that to the 10th degree. Meanwhile, the Soviets are also having a very expensive arms race, trying to keep up with us. Okay. And that's one of the Ph.D. Okay. Got Ron, 81, 89, beginning to place missiles in Western Europe, primarily Germany. And if the Soviets are going to keep up, that's going to be an additional expense, which they find difficult to keep up with. Also, SDI will find difficult to keep up with, also known as Star Wars, remember? Okay. Ron, being the consummate geopolitician, will also talk to the Saudis and say we want the price of oil to be kept nice and low. That's going to add an additional drain to the Soviets, which have got to supply the Eastern Europeans, and then whatever's left over, then they sell on the world market, and now the price of oil has gone down. Very astute on the part of Ron Reagan. Okay. And a little something on SDI. SDI, the incredible bluff that at that time was way beyond the envelope of what we could do militarily. However, Ron Reagan plays that hand exceptionally well, and the Soviets are afraid of SDI, and they decide that they can't keep up. They can't keep up. But by the way, we are harvesting some of the seedlings of SDI. If the Patriot missile system means anything to you, SDI is the great-great-granddaddy. It's still not, intercontinental ballistic missiles and so on. But what are we doing when we're helping Israel now and lots of other places? We're sending this technology. Okay. And again, this is a war home. So what do they engage in? They engage in START, Strategic Arms Reduction Talks. Okay. Gorby is in the driver's seat. It's 1985. Okay. And Gorby has his vision of glasnost and perestroika, different from his predecessors. Okay. Certainly different from Brezhnev, which just wanted the status quo. Certainly different from Khrushchev, which talks about peaceful coexistence, but then he talks out of both sides of his mouth. And remember, under Khrushchev, you have this this meeting in Geneva, and there's that feeling of the Geneva spirit. That doesn't last very long. And before that, you have Stalin, and of course that's head to head with Stalin. Okay? Gorby seems to be a different kind of leader, though, and he's talking about dialogue with the West. He's talking about restructuring the Soviet system. He's talking about openness and dialogue within the Soviet system. He is talking about replacing hardliners with people that are in light thinking with him. Okay? He says the Soviets are in a pre-crisis mode, but it can be helped, it can be modified. And that will be his undoing, because he wants to tweak the system, he doesn't want to change the system. look at some data. It tells you how badly the Soviets were functioning at that point. GDP per million, 1990, which was yesterday, sort of. Okay, USA, Soviet Union, wow. Okay, 40%. Well, actually less than 40%. Okay, population. Actually, they have more population and less GDP. Okay, per capita. Okay, 20,000 in 1990 versus 6,000, still less than 7,000. Now, the argument might be made that well, everything is state subsidized in the Soviet Union, so therefore you get on the metro or the equivalent of their subway, and you might only pay a few cents. Okay, so therefore your salary is not that much. All right, I can buy that argument. Look at employment. They have more people employed in a larger population, but still they're producing less. Okay, when we work 1,600 hours and they work 1,700 hours, the GDP per man per person is $27.62 by USA standards and $8.37 in the Soviet Union. The moral of the story is that we're outproducing them, and in addition, something that the numbers don't show, the quality of what we produce is so much better. Okay? There are, even with Gorby's perestroika and glasnost, there are still extreme shortages in the Soviet Union. So people will go around with an avoska, a little net, a little bag. Why? Avoska in Russian literally means the just-in-case bag. Because if I happen to be at the local state-run store and there are razor blades on the shelf, I'm going to take as many razor blades as I am allotted, just in case. I may not see razor blades again for months and months and months. Okay? That would not bother Dr. Twigg, but it would bother me terribly. Okay? But with those razor blades, I can go to Twigg and say, razor blades for soap, I'll trade you. Or razor blades for cabbages, or razor blades for whatever. That was the avoska, and that was the state of the economy for the Soviets in the 90s. Still shortages, and the quality of goods extremely bad. Okay? And we talked about restructuring and perestroika.
That was well spent doing.
An attempt to decentralize the economy, an attempt to open up discussions. Okay. Initially, the KGB is in favor of glasnost and perestroika. They think it's going to be another version of the Chinese 100 Flowers campaign. Remember when you had under Mao criticism, but that was just to identify who was against the regime, and then okay, they didn't understand that Gorby actually meant perestroika and glasnost. Okay. This will lead to a situation where things will snowball, and people will, in the beginning, very hesitantly and in a moderate way criticize, but then criticize more as they see that nothing happens, criticize more and more and more and more, and eventually snowballs, and Gorby sort of loses control. Gorby also has a problem in '86. It's Chernobyl, and in Chernobyl, he seems to forget about perestroika and glasnost. They try to keep that secret, and that's a black eye on his regime. Okay, and so therefore you have eventually in 1989, in the words of Lee Edwards, the year of miracles, where throughout Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, people go out into the streets, turn their back on communism, and even more amazingly, their local armies do not fire upon them, and that's the key. Okay? And there are peaceful revolutions throughout Eastern Europe and later in the Soviet Union after an attempted coup on Gorby, and with the exception of Ceausescu in Romania, these are all pretty much non-violent, and everyone will relinquish control. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I am out of gas. I thank you for your time.